Hey there, Mike Dunn, and we're back with another episode of Tabletop Throwdown. This week I've got a guest host with me, James Van Tonnegen. He's one of the editors at Gamingtrend. And then our special guest this week is Kevin Wilson, the designer of the Kinfire series of games from Incredible Dream. And we're actually going to spend this episode talking mostly about their new game that just hit Kickstarter yesterday, Kinfire Council. But before we dig into that, I just want to say hi to you guys. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing all right.
Awesome. So Kevin, let's talk for a minute about your pedigree, your work in the game industry. Before you were at Incredible Dream, you were with Fantasy Flight, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I was with Fantasy Flight Games for 10 years.
Oh wow! Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, you've worked on quite a few games that a lot of people would recognize: Arkham Horror, Fury of Dracula, all kinds of stuff. How was that experience?
It was a good time. I enjoyed working at FFG. I kind of like moved over from role playing games into board games at that point. The whole D20 bubble had kind of burst, and so I was like, okay, what do I do with my career next? And so I was looking at what else FFG did, and we also did board games there. So I transferred over into the board game division and started working on that sort of stuff, and we started getting some traction around about the time that I want to say Twilight Imperium 3 and Warcraft the board game and Doom the board game. About when those three came out, everybody started to pay attention to the FFG board games at that point. And from there, it was just kind of like building momentum over time at that point. And I stayed there for 10 years, and then I went freelance for about another 9 years. So
there is one game that you made a few years ago, and I didn't even realize you made it until just recently. But it kind of helped. It helped my wife and I during the lockdown, and that's oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden. It's a little tiny box. You guys are reprinting it right now. Gentle Rain, yes. My wife loves that game. It's a very zen-like kind of experience, and I'm glad you guys are reprinting it. Hopefully, one of these days we can actually get a review of it up, because I think that would be super cool.
Yeah.
I'd also like to see the differences from the Mondo published version, what you guys are doing, if anything.
We kept it pretty close. I think we swapped a couple tiles that had gotten a little mixed up in the previous version, so now there's like a perfectly even distribution of colors in the game now. So,
oh, very nice, fantastic. Well, let's talk about the Kinfire series. The first game was Kinfire Chronicles, and that has that's been a pretty big hit for you guys, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been doing really well. I mean, for a while there, it was sitting at like an 8.9 on BGG, which is, kind of the board game equivalent of walking on water, really. So,
right.
And I was pretty happy with how that's gone. It's dropped down a little bit as we got more and more reviews, but it's still doing really well. People are enjoying it. A lot of glowing praise on the game. So very happy with it.
Fantastic. Now, and then you followed that up with the Kinfire Delve series. I believe there's two of them that are out now, and you've got more planned.
Yeah,
and then of course that brings us to Kinfire Council. The one thing that's very interesting about these games is that they all have like a shared world, right? Tell us a little bit about the world of Kinfire.
Yeah, so we developed the world of Atios for the first Kinfire game, and we kind of knew that we wanted to do more with it. That maybe even someday, hopefully, take it multimedia or something like that. And we wanted to have a nice interesting fantasy setting with some twists to it that are still a bit familiar to everyone, so they don't have to relearn everything they ever knew about fantasy. But uh, a setting that is conducive to setting games in it and doing adventures in it. Like getting all the right mix and stuff. And I used to, like I said, I used to design RPGs and such, so I know a lot about crafting a setting to a to to leave hooks in it. To do all that. And we worked with some of the writers from the Witcher 3, the video game, to
Oh,
develop the setting initially. And they gave us some really interesting hooks. We have the whole the darkness and the starless nights, which I think is a fun concept to build a setting around. And so, when the starless nights descend, the darkness spreads across the world, and anything it touches is either changed or transformed or lost. And so uh, it becomes a nice hook to build events around. And then we have the Kinfire lighthouses, which stabilize and keep the darkness at bay, which gives us, not only some cool images to have, at the big cool lighthouse in the middle of the city, which is always fun, but also, again, it gives us something to build quests around, build stories around, and that sort of thing. And that's kind of where we've gone in the new one, is that they've kind of reached a point of stabilizing the city a bit, and now they're looking to build new Kinfire lighthouses in the surrounding area and kind of extend the reach of that light everywhere.
the thing that I'm curious about, like whenever I see publishers come out with games that all fit within the same setting, um, is like how much do they influence each other? Like how much? It's actually two things. Like on one side, how much does the setting kind of make for a more comprehensive experience for the players, but also like kind of the flip side of that is uh, how hard is it for new players that aren't familiar with the setting to dig in. Like how did you approach that balance for the Kinfire games?
Well, it's one of those things where having a couple of stable bits of central lore, like I said, the lighthouses in the darkness, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the one bit of refresher material that we give out in each game, and kind of here's the basis of the setting, and we don't have to go into too much details elsewhere in the setting. We just kind of like hit that and then go into whatever the specific game is about. But it's good to have those kind of like touchstones in the setting, that like here are the commonalities, here are the things that we're always going to mention or have in all of our games and such. So if you look at Chronicles and Delve, there's uh, the lanterns, the Kinfire lanterns, and the Seekers. The kind of like the characters there are the adventurers, and they have these little lanterns that they can take out into the darkness. It's sort of like a little portable lighthouse for them to keep them safe in the darkness. And so that's one of the things that we keep kind of static through the different games, and we build on that. So you only have to learn some of that stuff once, and then you get to recognize it as you go on and have future adventures. And then we have like the idea of Kinfire as magic. We have various, like I said, touchstones, through lines through the whole thing that we keep calling back to. And that's nice in that it gives you, again, fewer things you have to learn in each new game. Delve has a lot of things that call back to Chronicles. When you play that, you look at it and like, oh, these card colors are kind of the same as they were in Chronicles and things like that. And so it helps explain. And it's sort of like when you're doing a game and you're trying to marry theme and mechanics together, and ideally you want the theme to be supported by the mechanics, and for the mechanics to be explained by the theme, and that way everything kind of serves its purpose and helps mesh the gears and creates a cohesive kind of experience.
Nice. Now I know Chronicles is a more narrative driven experience. Um, is there like a narrative throughput or chronology to the games that have followed? Like, do they kind of take place simultaneously, or are they kind of uh, talking about like events that like happened after like the previous game or something like that?
Well, so far we have the first thing we have chronologically is actually the webtoon, the Kinfire First Expedition. That kind of takes place like 10 years before Chronicles. And then there's Chronicles, and Delve is kind of a little bit around the same time as Chronicles-ish. It's a little hazy there. And then Council is going to take place after Chronicles. So not a long time, but like shortly after Chronicles. And it sort of refers to some of the events that took place in Chronicles, but I try to do it in a way that doesn't spoil it for players who haven't played Chronicles yet.
And I imagine you're carrying over stuff like iconography and design aesthetic and that sort of thing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really incredibly strong art team and graphic design team, so they've given us kind of a lot of visual language to use in the game. And kind of my one request at the start was I wanted a nice bright color palette for the whole thing. I wanted to avoid the kind of the grays and browns of modern video games.
Well, I'd definitely say you succeeded there. Um, Going back to the through lines, I know when we played with Chris, the guy who reviewed Kinfire Chronicles for Gamingtrend, he recognized a lot of those elements from Chronicles in Council. So it was very cool to see that.
Yeah, in Council, while you are playing sort of like the characters who are bossing you around in Chronicles, in Council now you're getting to boss around your old characters, kind of
Oh,
basically.
nice.
So you
Oh, okay. So some of the seekers that appear that you're bossing around in Council appeared in Chronicles.
yeah, all six of those. Those are the six seekers are sort of our main cast for the setting, and I
Got it.
try to always have them in anything we do. They're kind of our main characters, and so we always want to build them up and keep them somewhere in the game, even if it's not necessarily always completely front and center like in Council. We still want them there because they're kind of the face for the players in a lot of ways. So
I imagine it makes it easier for putting together new games and prototypes and stuff too.
oh yeah, it's a good thing the art team likes playing dress up with the characters because drawing them in different outfits and such. I'm glad it doesn't get them. I'm glad they're not bored by that because we keep reusing them. In Council, they're kind of dressed up in sort of like their Sunday best for going around town. In Delve, they're kind of in their dungeon Delve outfits, and in Chronicles, they're just kind of like they're adventuring about town outfits, as it were. So I don't know, it's fun to keep kind of showing different aspects of the same characters, I think.
Nice. And now, did you come up with this world, or have you been working with someone else on it?
It was a team effort in a lot of ways. There was the team members, the guys from Witcher 3 who did kind of the initial pitch on the world. Um, and then a lot of the team, we've all been helping to flesh out the various lore of the setting. I did a lot of the design work on the city of Dinlux itself and like making it make sense and laying it out and such. Kathy does a ton of just all sorts of lore things for the setting. We have a World Anvil page that has kind of like a lot of our background stuff on there that people can go there and look it up and read through about all the different creatures and characters and stuff. So that's a nice resource to have.
So you were talking about how you've been working with the artists, and how you were pressing for a colorful palette as opposed to like a more dark and dingy palette. I guess I'm curious as to like how deep that collaboration goes with the artists. Like, do they? Is there some interplay between them and like coming up with design with like game mechanics, narrative direction? Like how deep does that collaboration go?
Well, it's sort of a. I try to be as hands off as I can be with the art. There was sort of like when we were doing the new version of Cosmic Encounter at Fantasy Flight. Um, I kind of just gave the artists, here's Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials, the book from like the 70s or so. It had kind of like the photorealistic aliens in it. I said we want the aliens to kind of look like this, and then we would just have them send us sketches and do that. And that's kind of a lot of how I've tried to be with the Kinfire setting as well. Is I kind of give loose descriptions of what I want, and then I let them go to town. The character Flickers, who is the little like the mothling that sits on Kor's shoulder all the time. He's like the Revenant, the robot character. He has a little sidekick character. That character was completely invented by the artists. I had nothing to do with it until like they produced the sketch one day, and I said, "We want this character in the game." I'm like, "All right, we can make that happen." Yeah, there
Yes, nice.
and he's become kind of the mascot of the setting in a lot of ways. But again, that was the sort of thing. It's nice to have a team that brings things to the table and has a bunch of wild ideas that they want to try out, and it's just like, yeah, all right, see if I can make it work.
And one thing I've noticed about the setting as well, and especially Kinfire Chronicles, is like who that game is resonating with. Like it seems like your audience skews a bit younger than a lot of similar games in the industry. Would you agree with that?
I would say so. I mean, we went kind of out of our way to make that game a lot easier than most of that style of game. Still wanted plenty of depth to it, but you can basically start playing that game within 15 minutes of opening the box, which is that was one of our big goals of like you could just open up the box, put the stuff out on the table, look through the first little rule book, and then it'll walk you through that initial combat and it'll teach you things as you go along. And it's very welcoming to newbies and that sort of thing. And that kind of goes back. I've always tried to not exclude people from gaming as much as possible. Like you would be amazed at how many people have come up to me at conventions and told me that Arkham Horror was their very first board game. And I've always been kind of astonished by that because Arkham Horror is not a light game. It's
Right.
it's a chunky boy, and that so many people kind of got into the hobby through that game is always kind of astonishing to me. But this time we went in with the notion that we wanted this to be a very welcoming game that people could get into, and it wasn't not such a brain burner, not such a intimidating game.
And is that different for Kinfire Council? It's a bit. I wouldn't say it's super heavy or anything, but it's definitely heavier than Chronicles sounds.
Yeah, Kinfire Council is kind of more squarely aimed at the board game geek community, the folks who are familiar with worker placement games and things like that already. So if you know the basics of worker placement, there's not a lot of heavy lifting to do to learn Kinfire Council. Really, you're just learning some of the details and things. So it's kind of more of a intermediate level Euro game in that sense. And it's one of my goals as I'm kind of getting to help decide what kind of games we're putting out in the various Kinfire line and everything. And so one of my goals is to kind of, put something out for different groups of people. And so we're not always catering to the same small group of people. We're giving different windows into the setting, different game experiences. And honestly, as a game designer, I get really bored if I'm doing the same thing all the time. So
Yeah,
I
was
like
just about to
variety
say
too.
that. Variety is the spice of life. Yeah, actually, when we were playing last weekend, one of the games that came to mind, I think, for Chris and I, and maybe James too, if I can't remember, it kind of evoked the Lords of Waterdeep a bit. in some of the gameplay mechanics and kind of the approach to the theme and everything. And one of the things that I think that game did really well is kind of introduce players to a crunchier kind of Euro style of play.
Right. And that was actually part of the consideration in Council, was that Lords of Waterdeep already existed. It's very nice, we already got one kind of thing. So it's like,
right.
if we're going to go into that same kind of thematic space for a worker placement, you need to provide something different than just what Lords of Waterdeep did. So we kind of went for a more in-depth, beefier game. I got a ton of respect for that design. It's actually one of my favorite Euros.
Yeah, I think it's great too. I actually think it was made even better by the expansion, because I feel like the expansion to that game kind of addressed some of the nitpicks that I had with the core game. I remember what it was. We were looking at different parts of the game, and we were like, this part feels like Lords of Waterdeep, and this part feels like something else layered on top of that. So it does feel a little crunchier than Lords of Waterdeep, but I thought any game that reminds me of Lords of Waterdeep is doing something right, in my opinion.
Well, I have a lot of, like I said, I have a lot of respect for the design. It kind of distills worker placement down into the bare essentials and provides a really good introduction to that genre for gamers, I think. And because we're doing a similar thing where we have, you're in charge of a city, you're trying to run the city, you're going to have some similarities kind of out of necessity, because you're hitting the same you're hitting the same tonal notes. And so it was more about like, okay, well, what am I gonna do different? What are my twists? How am I gonna like give this its own identity and make this stand out among the fairly crowded worker placement, field? And so we've got a couple things in there that I think are very distinctive twists that you don't see a lot of, or if at all, in the out in the field. So,
did you want to unpack some of those twists?
Well,
that was my next question.
Obviously, I would say the most noticeable one in the game is the Cult of Altan, which is the sort of like the evil group at the table. It's the invisible player at the table, and having the enemy workers come out and block the spaces, which keeps the board changing up every round. So you're always having a new dynamic setup every round of the game, effectively. And then you have the threat cards come out, and those give you like an extra plate to spin over here, but also like things that are looming above you. And then, of course, the idea that you can throw in with the cult, that you can become the conspirator, and if you've fallen too far behind, you decide like, oh, I'm not going to be able to catch up with the leader at this point. All right, well, maybe the cult can. So I'm gonna throw in with them, and I'm gonna like sell out and become the conspirator, and hopefully the cult will win, and then I'm actually the winner. So that was like one of the biggest twists of the whole thing, was having that sort of like enemy player in the game.
I really like that, because it becomes a choice that a player makes instead of like a card that's dealt out to you at the beginning of the game. You're a traitor or something. You make a calculus in your head, and you're like, "There's no way I can win the legit way. So let me see if I can boost the cult along and move some threat tokens around on these cards that can cause them to pop a little bit earlier or whatever."
Mm-hmm. The other big twist is sort of, there's not a ton of, this is not a completely unique twist, but there's not a ton of worker placement games that do it, and that is that you can upgrade each of your workers with a skill, and they all get like little kind of mini player powers, effectively. So when you play this guy, you can get a card out of the deck instead of a coin or something when you play them. And there's 6 different skills, so depending on the loadout you want to put on your characters, assuming you even want to mess with the skills, you can create a very different kind of strategic experience for yourself. There's one of the skills that lets you share spaces with other workers, which is kind of the rule in worker placement, that you don't get to do that. But you can go heavy on that one. You can get every one of your workers that skill if you want to, and then you just don't have to care where everybody else moves. Or you could even you could even go to the same space with every one of your workers in the same round and just keep hitting that same space if you wanted to. So there's I love trying to build in possibilities and variability into designs. That's my thing, and I love Arkham. I love Arkham Horror, Cosmic Encounter. Those were games that really tried to do that with, and the same thing here with Council within the world of worker placement now.
I love how that empowers players more, but I can't help but wonder if that's like a balancing nightmare for you, right?
Oh, it has been. It absolutely has been. But that's the job is grind it down, work the math, and get it as tight as you can. And I've been doing this a long time, so it's not so bad. I always start with a math formula at the core of any one of my games, and then I work from there. So
James, I could just imagine some of the players that we play with on Saturdays, like just drilling in on like one tactic, and we've seen it in other games where they drill in on one tactic and it almost feels like an exploit, right? Because maybe they might have stumbled onto that one imbalanced thing, or it's just so out of left field that nobody else even sees it coming, kind of thing. But I also kind of love that too, right? Like it makes for an unpredictable session,
Something I love about board games is board games that can surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and safe design is boring design at the end of the day.
Right.
Like if you're not willing to take some chances, you're not going to make great games.
Exactly. Speaking of making changes, some changes have been made to the game even since you guys sent us one of the prototypes. And I guess speak to like where you think the state of the game is right now, going into this Kickstarter next week, and not only how long it took you to get to this point, but how much more you still think you have to do, and possibly even how much you're hoping some backers might be able to help influence the direction the design goes. That's like 5 questions in one. I'm sorry.
No worries. So we've been in internal playtesting for quite a while at this point, and we opened it up to some external playtesters, and we've been doing that for a while now, and have kind of ground off a lot of the rough edges. And I feel like we reached a point where the core rules are stable now, and that's not been terribly long that we've done that. Maybe a week or two now. I've kind of felt like, okay, we made some changes to the way the lighthouses worked, and then there'd been some kind of niggling things that were bothering me about the game that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And I was like, I think it's the lighthouses, and made the change there. Played some more, and it's like, okay, yeah, that was the problem. Everything is kind of smooth now. And so at this point, it's just a matter of tweaking little numbers here and there and making sure every little thing is balancing out, making sure that if somebody goes, like you said, drills down on one thing, that's not just the way to win the game. You don't ever want to have the auto strategy.
Right.
If anything, that was one of the reasons I've been very cautious about how the cult victory works. Players have been like, I want to be able to give the cult a lot more points, and how do it's like, well, what if 3 of you want to do that, and the other player wants to try and win normally? That player is not going to be able to keep up with y'all. And so there just have to be some math balancing and stuff there to kind of keep those things. And I've been kind of shooting for I want the cult to win the game about 25 to 33% of the time. It's kind of my feeling in my head of what would feel good. And so that's kind of where I'm playing that out. And you should be able to outrun them, maybe. And it's also there was a shift from having all of the cult's victory points visible to the players at one point, and now there are hidden threats where some of their points are face down from the start of the game, so you don't know exactly how many points they've got. There's a range of where they're probably at, but actually, they could be from here to here in terms of victory points, and you're not 100% sure until the very end of the game.
Yeah, that introduces a lot of
So
tension.
there's that moment of revealing those hidden threats at the end of the game, and everybody's just kind of like, oh god, and just it's a nice moment, and that really made that part of the game pop really nicely. It made me happy.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah,
left
I
to
was
do,
just
like I
looking
said.
over some of. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. I was going to say, as far as what we have left to do, like I said, it's mostly just balancing numbers. I'm also working on the expansion for the game. We have the Winds of Change expansion that's going to be in the Kickstarter as well. And that's I'm working now basically on the solo / co-op variant for the game. And then there are these things called rezoning laws, which is kind of a fun thing where you'll have an alternate version of each of the spaces on the board. They're all tiles that you flip over when you upgrade them. And then so there's like location 1, but in the expansion you'll have a law that you can pass that will say, okay, we'll swap location 1 and 1A now. And that's forever until this law is passed again, maybe in some future game. And so your version of the game, can evolve and become different from everybody else's version of the game.
So it sounds like the expansion is going to add a legacy aspect to the game.
Yeah, a little vague bit of it.
Legacy light.
It's almost more like an oath element or something, where it's like a little bit of component cycling really from game to game. So you just have like a different start state as you go along and everything. But once that's nailed down, that'd be the rest of it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I can't help but wonder, given the theme of the game, if at some point during the development process that player negotiation had a bigger role, considering it's like a council of players. I mean, I know there is some of that in the things that the players vote on every round. But I'm wondering if maybe there was a little bit more of that. Like one of my favorite games has always been Diplomacy, because it's kind of got this purity of there's no luck. It's all about how well you can bullshit everybody else and stab them in the back and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if there might have been a little bit more of that early on that maybe didn't maybe was deemed a little too player unfriendly or a little too hard for the target audience.
No, actually, in this one, I kind of knew from the very start that I was going again for more pure Euro design on this one. I've done other games that are very heavy negotiations. I want to say Mistborn. The Mistborn board game was one that I did not so long ago. That's sort of based off of sort of the skeleton of Sid Sackson's "I'm the Boss" almost. And there's just a ton of like kind of freewheeling negotiating in that game. And that game has done well, but obviously, the BGG hardcore crowd has been kind of like, I didn't really care for the negotiation parts and these sort of things. So like, all right, I'll file that away, and kind of keep track of what everybody is into at this point. You always got to like keep track of, as a professional game designer, you're not just making games for fun. You also have to kind of keep track of what people are into and what's going to go well. And so I kind of made the call on this one early on that I was going to do, you can negotiate, but not like to the point of like trading resources back and forth or anything like that. It needs to be something where someone can feel like they've won it on their merits, on their pure, pure strategic victory kind of thing. And so I've kind of leaned more in that direction on this one.
Right on. So as a designer, there are there's an adage that all designers, whether they're game designers or visual designers, that sort of thing, that I feel rings true in pretty much any given situation where you're designing something complex like this, and that is the concept of killing your darlings.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about one or more of the darlings that you may have killed in the process of making Kinfire Council.
All right. Well, let's see. There are a couple big ones. One fairly recently, actually, like I said, with the lighthouses. But the first one I'll talk about was the way that the cult victory used to work. The cult victory used to be if the cult wins, then actually the player in last place won. And that was sort of the way it worked over in Mistborn. And it didn't work at all. Like in this context, in this game, it was a no-go. You were playing a totally different game at that point, and it just didn't mesh with the mechanics. So, we adjusted around, and we added the cult influence, and kind of getting, cozying up to the cult now became the new way to win that way. With the lighthouses, initially you chose the length of game you wanted by how many lighthouses you wanted to build. 3 was like a shorter game, 4 was like a longer game, and you would build that many lighthouses, and the game would just keep going until those lighthouses were either built or destroyed by the cult. And this was such an unstable mechanic for the game, and I struggled with it for a long time, and I really wanted that to work out, but it's one of those, like, you're looking back on it, you're like, I should have let that go way sooner than I did. That was hubris. But I really liked the idea of it, and so I stuck with it longer than I should have. But in the end, I was just like, okay, no, we need to have the game is this long, and we're going to build a lighthouse every round, and then we're going to work with that, and that gave us just a much cleaner play experience at that point, and it solved so many problems. And I was just like, okay, I should have killed that darling a while back, kind of thing. So you run into those all the time as a game designer. You have like ideas you think are really cool, and this is central to the idea of this game. The whole game is built on this idea, and it's like, yeah, don't get too attached, just in case.
Yeah. Actually, the I believe the session we played last week, that particular rule, the variability of how many lighthouses, depending which it influenced how long your game was, that was still in play. And I remember thinking about that. I was like, on one hand, that's kind of cool because you can define how long the game goes on, but on the other hand, how do you know where to begin? Like, how many lighthouses should you do on the first play, or like how big of a difference does it make between different games, right?
Yeah, and that was ultimately the thing, is that if everybody piled onto the lighthouses right away, you got such a different game experience than if everybody like farted around doing their own things for ages and ages and ages, and then eventually remembered, oh yeah, there's a lighthouse we should build. Like, the game length varied between like 30 minutes and 3.5 hours, and just like, oh, this is not great. I gotta fix this.
Oof.
And so, that was the call at the end, was like, okay, we're gonna stabilize this so we can actually give people, a reasonable play length that they can kind of predict and plan for. And it also, like, you have kind of long-term and short-term strategies in any given game, stuff that pays off quickly, stuff that takes longer. And in a game where you don't know how long the game's going to be, like, the short-term strategy is the way to go.
For that.
Like, you don't want to do the long-term stuff at that point. It's maybe it doesn't pay out at all. You don't know. So stabilizing the length of the game was, it was a necessity in the end.
I also noticed that you in the rulebook it changed how the threat cards work. They become much more central to how the cult deals damage to lighthouses.
Yeah,
as opposed to being kind of a side thing.
Yeah, we had like the cultists themselves out on the board were dealing a lot of the damage, and changed the way that worked to kind of funnel that back into the threat cards, which were kind of the set piece over here, which is like, what's happening? Why is this damage being dealt? And I wanted to like bring that more back into light in the game. And so it's now not this one cultist dealing damage over here. It's the wyvern that they've let loose in the city or whatever has rampaged and done damage, and so it brings the focus back. Focal points are an important thing in game design. You want to only have the players paying attention to so many things at once. And so I had to like be a little more careful about that and tighten it up, basically.
Yeah, it feels like the cult is really like you're really intending for the cult to kind of be the wild card of the game. Like, you know, depending on how players approach the cult, could not necessarily swing the game in different directions, but change the way people play during the course of the session. So I was definitely pleased to see that that you guys gave the cult a little bit more teeth.
Yeah.
Because in our session, like we largely kept them contained. Like, and I remember thinking, man, I really kind of was hoping I'd be able to see how some of these mechanics played out, but like they just didn't really seem like much of a threat in the way that the game state was at that time. So really curious to play with the new teethy cult.
The one of the kind of the central elements of the game design that I've played with a lot in this one, and that I've kind of been educated a little bit more on now, even as a part of this game design, is just the core concept of incentives and keeping those in mind. Like, it's honestly it's been a while since I did a cooperative or a competitive game, I should say. I do a lot of cooperative games, and so sometimes you have to put yourself into a different mindset for different style of game, and one of the things was incentives. And so kind of in Council, all of your player powers are little bundles of incentives. Effectively, they're things to encourage you to do this or that. And one of the things in the game was when you arrest cultists, and how does that work, and how much of an incentive does that provide to you. And there was a point where there was not enough incentive. There was another point where there was too much incentive to arrest them. We're getting victory points for them and getting all this other stuff, and everybody was, no cultist left alive by the end of the round, kind of thing. And now it's kind of found a good middle ground where, you do want to you do want to take care of the cultists, but like you've got stuff you want to do too. You've got your own problems to worry about, and maybe a few of those cultists, they don't get arrested this round. It's fine. It'll be fine.
Well, one thing I did like about it is that it did introduce like a hint of co-op into the gameplay, right? Because like nobody at the table wants the cultists, well, unless you align with the cultists, of course. But if nobody's aligned with the cultists, nobody wants the cultists to like overrun everything. So there was a bit of like there was a touch of negotiation at the table, like, all right, I'll go take care of this cultist over here if you do that sort of thing. But I think the problem is that we got too efficient with it. Right, we got really good at stomping those cultists down, and yeah, I think tying them to the threat cards definitely kind of ramps things up a bit.
Yeah, well, in the co-op variant, kind of the way it's going to work is there's going to be some extra couple little game elements that's different from the competitive version, but like in general, the way it works is you as the group win if all of you beat the cult. So every one of you has to score higher than the cult at the end of the game for the group to win. So you're going to have to like pull each other up now in that variant of the game. So I think it's a fun twist, gives you a different play experience, and a lot of our players for Kinfire, a lot of our fans for the Kinfire universe really are centered in that solitaire / co-op space. So I wanted to also make sure that we were taking care of them as well.
Accommodating them, yeah.
Now, is that is the co-op going to be part of the expansion content, or is that going to be part of the base game?
It'll be in the expansion content. It's one of those things where extra components are required. Not everybody's going to want it, so it's better as an expansion kind of product.
Makes perfect sense.
And I'm assuming the expansion will be part of the Kickstarter as well, where you could get like kind of more of an all-in kind of pledge or an add-on kind of thing.
Yeah, there'll be like the baseline pledge and then the fancier pledge where you'll get the expansion included and all that stuff. So it's be nice and simple.
Nice. Now, we talked about killing your darlings. Let's flip that. Is there something that you came up with, like right at the very beginning, that has just been rock solid through the whole of the design process? Like what do you feel you just nailed?
And I mean, it's
so far. Caveat. So far.
Well, it's kind of a weird thing, but like the moment that I came up for this game was when the artist sent me the map of Dinlux for Chronicles. And the map in Chronicles is gorgeous. Like, it is ridiculously over the top gorgeous compared to, like, what I was expecting. And I was like, wow, this looks amazing. I want to play a game on this now. And so in my head, I started thinking about, well, how would I set a game in Dinlux at that point? And then I started thinking, and one of the things about Dinlux in the story stuff and the lore is that it's kind of divided into four boroughs, and there's like 2 boroughs down low where the less wealthy people live. There's the Stumps and the Horseshoe Island there. And then as you go up in the town, you go up the mountainside, basically, you get into the Nests, and that's kind of like the middle class area. And then you go up again, and you get into the Coping, and that's where all the rich, powerful people live. And I knew right from the start that I wanted that to be kind of part of the structure of the city, and that structure should matter in the game. And so that's kind of where the concept of the taxes and the coffers and all that comes from. And mathematically, like, the actions down in the low parts of the city are kind of the weaker actions. And then you go up to the middle part, and there are better actions, but you have to pay a coin to go there and use them. And then the best actions are up in the top part of the city, but you have to pay 2 coins to go there and use those. And so it kind of created this little this economy at the core of the whole game, and that has stayed kind of rock solid from almost day one, really. And
the coffer system is. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, and it kind of as a side effect, like we're physically going to elevate those pieces of the board using like the storage tray of the game, so that it'll have like a 3-tiered table presence, which will just be cool.
Spiffy.
Very nice. I was going to say that the coffer system seems to also limit people who kind of over rely on one mechanic too much, especially if they're abusing their counselor mechanic a lot. The coffer seems to be a very good way of limiting that.
Yeah, and you're having a couple of coins in your pocket in the game is effectively a form of freedom for you. It gives you more choices to play with. And so anytime you run out of coin, your possibilities reduce, and now you're stuck in this lower part of the board. You need to like deal with more limited resources, more limited actions. But it's a good thing, and it means you're not always having to care about everything out there going on all at once. Your focal points are growing and shrinking according to the situation that you're in, and that's a real helpful thing for players. Actually, in the end, it focuses you better.
Obviously, we have a prototype of the game right now that we've been playing, but I know you guys have been also demoing it on Tabletopia. Will that be something that people who are thinking about backing, will they be able to access the Tabletopia instance? Will they, or I imagine maybe see some up to date videos of you guys playing it on Tabletopia. Like what? I guess what I'm asking is what opportunities will potential backers have to, like, maybe dig into the rules or see how it plays, that sort of thing. Obviously, we're going to be providing some of that too, because we'll have a preview of the prototype. But I know some Kickstarters like to they'll put it up on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia, and then you can go try it out yourself. Is that something you guys are thinking about doing?
Yeah, I believe so. I know that I've kept the Tabletopia, model up to date as much as possible, so that will hopefully be available for everybody. Might have to tidy a couple things up here and there, but you know how it goes.
Nice.
We'll also have the rule book kind of in its freshest form possible. It's the most up to date version. We'll have some folks who have done playthroughs. I think we're going to try and do a team playthrough of the game so that you can kind of see again the most super up to date version that we've got. It's always one of those things that like you like to have everything 100% nailed down before it, but sometimes game design takes between this long and this long. It's a bit of a vague thing, and so we've been building the raft a little bit as we've sailed across the lake still, but it's coming together. I'm feeling really good about it. And I think that everybody will see in the new version and as everything comes together, like it's pretty rock solid.
Excellent. And yeah, I find it a little refreshing that you guys are still kind of hammering out some of the fine points of the design, because I in some ways I find that some Kickstarters, some crowdfunding, where they've already got everything done, they've already got all the art assets in, and they just feel a little stagnant. Like I feel like something like this potentially opens up to collaboration with backers on certain things, especially as you start digging into later stretch goals and that sort of thing. It leaves that space for a little bit of inspiration and collaboration.
Yeah, with some wiggle room here and there, that sort of thing. It's always good to have that in there. We've done a lot of that with the play testers already, where suggestions that they have made, I have tweaked some stuff. I'm busy changing a couple cards after some of the responses from the previews yesterday, and it's like, oh, these take that cards, the game is really good except for that. I was like, all right, fine, we'll get rid of those. We'll change it to something else. It's fine. You know how that stuff goes. It's
awesome.
Like, all right.
Oh yeah. Well, fantastic.
Definitely something that came up.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin. The game looks great. We're probably going to get some more time with it this weekend. I'm hoping. So yeah, be sure to go to Kickstarter, back Kinfire Council. You'll be able to back to add on some of the previous Kinfire games as well. So it might be a good chance to catch up on the whole Kinfire world. But yeah, thanks again, Kevin, and we will see everybody else in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you, James. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. It was a great time.